As best as you can, forget Charlton Heston and the Ten Commandments. Forget that cartoon, The Prince of Egypt. Forget all those Sunday school lessons that you learned when you were little kids. A lot of those things take a lot of license to try to explain with some reason and some logic why certain events occurred and why certain people did the things that they did. And it makes sense, but the truth is it's not in Scripture. Our story is very short, and it's going to have more questions than it is answers. We will do some imagining, but I want to make sure that we understand that in our imagining, none of it is from Scripture, but we can imagine some things because they're human and we're human, and so we can put ourselves in their shoes and kind of come up with some idea of what they might have been going through or what they might have been thinking. But what I want to do this morning is look at this Scripture very plainly. Let's take it for what it is, and let's read into it only what is there. Before we get to it, though, I want to fill you in on what's been going on. A few hundred years before, there was Joseph, not Joseph, the husband of Mary, the adopted dad of Christ, but this is Joseph, one of the 12 sons of Jacob, one of the 12 sons of Israel. He went to Egypt. That was another long story. I don't have time to get into that. You'll have to read that. It's in Genesis. But he ends up in Egypt, and there's going to be a famine. And Joseph rescues the Egyptians, and in so doing also rescues his own family, his other 11 brothers and their wives and kids, and his father, and everybody gets rescued from this famine, and they're living in Israel. And the family of Israel is growing, and they're growing past family. They're now a nation. They're a people. They're getting larger. And the Bible tells us that there arose a Pharaoh that did not know Joseph. A few hundred years have passed. And now there's this foreign people living in Egypt. And the Egyptian Pharaoh is starting to get scared. So he says, we need to deal with this before they try to take things over. So they start to treat the Israelites really harshly. They begin using them as slaves. And that doesn't diminish their number at all. God continues to bless them, and they continue to grow. And so Pharaoh decides, you know what? I got a sneaky plan. I'm going to call the midwives together. And I'm going to tell them that if a male is born to an Israelite, they're to murder him. But if it's a girl, let him live. Well, the midwives actually fear God more than they fear Pharaoh, and so they don't do it. When Pharaoh calls them in and goes, why didn't you do it? They come up with all kinds of excuses, one of them being, well, the Israelite women are a little more hardy than the Egyptian women, and they give birth before we get there. We don't know what to do. We can't kill the kid afterwards, so what are we supposed to do? So Pharaoh lets them go, and God blesses them because they didn't murder these young Egyptian boys. But Pharaoh's not done. He comes up with another plan. And he commands the people that when a baby boy is born, they are to throw him into the Nile and allow him to drown. And of course, the young girls are allowed to live. And that's where we pick up our story, beginning in Exodus chapter 2, verse 1. It's that setting that we find these people living in. Now a man from the house of Levi went and married a daughter of Levi. The woman conceived and bore a son. And when she saw that he was beautiful, she hid him for 3 months. But when she could hide him no longer, she got him a wicker basket and covered it over with tar and pitch. Then she put the child into it and set it among the reeds by the bank of the Nile. His sister stood at a distance to find out what would happen to him. The daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the Nile, with her maidens walking alongside the Nile, and she saw the basket among the reeds and sent her maid, and she brought it to her. When she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the boy was crying. And she had pity on him and said, "This is one of the Hebrews' children." Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and call a nurse for you from the Hebrew women, that she may nurse the child for you?" Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Go ahead." So the girl went out and called the child's mother. Then Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this child away and nurse him for me, and I will give you your wages." So the woman took the child and nursed him. The child grew, and she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son, and she named him Moses, and said, "Because I drew him out of the water." There are 4 characteristics in these 2 women that I want to look at, because I think that they challenge us and they provide some model for moms. Moms especially, but I think for dads too, but because today's Mother's Day, we'll focus on the moms. If you notice, the title of today's message, it's Mother's Love. The apostrophe is not in the wrong place. If this was a single mom, the apostrophe would become before the S. But really what we're going to look at here is that Moses has 2 moms. And I think that's really important in this story, because I think it invites a lot of people into it that normally we wouldn't. The first characteristic that we're going to look at is courageous love. Incredibly courageous love. Moses' biological mom, can you imagine in this setting, as she's pregnant, she's probably, and again, this is where we are imagining, it's not in Scripture, but because we are humans, we can put ourselves in her shoes. I am sure that she has spent many a night on her knees praying for a girl. Can you imagine having to take the child, or having a relative have to take the child immediately from your womb and throw it into the Nile, knowing that it is going to drown? It is a horrible thought. And so she must have spent sleepless nights just hoping that this child would be born a girl. And yet it's a boy. And so now she's left with, what do I do? Do I follow the law? Or do I break the law? And then what are the consequences for me and my family for breaking the law? What incredible courage it must have took for her to hide this child for 3 months. There may be some other instances in Hebrew history of other women trying to do the same thing, maybe succeeding for a short time or for a long time. None of that is in the Bible. The fact that this gives me some reason to believe that this is a unique situation. That means also that there probably were other Hebrew women that followed the law as Pharaoh commanded it. There's question as to how could they have known that a baby boy would have been born to a person? What could they have done? Were there soldiers that roamed around that were purposefully looking for children being born and looking for males that would come in and ransack your house? I don't know, but I think Stephen in Acts, as he's giving his defense before he is martyred, gives us a little glimmer, gives us an idea of how they may have known. And it's actually really simple when we think about it. In Acts chapter 7, verse 9, Stephen in his defense is bringing up Moses and the Israelites and their struggle in Egypt. And he says, it was he being Pharaoh, it was he who took shrewd advantage of our race and mistreated our fathers so that they would expose their infants and they would not survive. Shrewd advantage of our race. What is one thing that differentiated the Egyptians from the Israelites that would cause infant males to be exposed? We look back at Genesis and we look at the first covenant between Abraham and God. We see that on the 8th day after a child of male is born, they must be circumcised. Shrewd advantage that would cause the infants to be exposed. I don't think it took very much for the Egyptians to know that a boy had been born to a family. Can you imagine trying to hide the screaming during the surgery? It would have been impossible. The amount of blood. All of their neighbors, any Egyptian soldiers nearby, would surely know on the 8th day whether it was a boy or a girl that had been born in that household. So it begs the question, was Moses circumcised? And then, how did his mom keep it hidden? Did she have an extra room? Did she muffle his cries? Did they play loud music? Did God divinely intervene and keep him asleep the whole time? Or did she just skip that ceremony in order to save her beautiful child? In any case, imagine the courageous love that it took to ignore man's law and to care for this illegal child for 3 straight months. It's not convenient love. It is not comfortable love. This is love filled with fear and angst, horrible nightmares. This is the kind of love that Moses' birth mom showed him in the first 3 months of his life. But after 3 months, she finds that she can't hide him any longer. Something's happened. Either he's starting to toddle around or he's starting to make more noise or something's going on that she can no longer keep him. Maybe the soldiers have figured out that she's up to something. Maybe her husband's gotten in some trouble. We don't know. But for some reason, she can't keep him around. And so she makes this basket. And it's not just any basket. It says that she covers it with tar and pitch, which gives us some indication that she is making it waterproof. There is some sense that she is saving this child. And yet, casting it out on the waters, on the Nile, which, if I understand correctly, is filled with alligators and lots of other carnivorous creatures, is probably not the safest place for an infant to go. And so we find our second characteristic of this birth mother: incredible trust and faith in God. Let's think about the Nile for a couple seconds, and we can think of it in light of last week at our baptisms. Remember, what did water symbolize in our baptism? It symbolizes death, just like it did in Noah, correct? Well, let's look at the symbolism of water in this story. Where were the infant children to be cast when the boys were born? Into the Nile. And yet here is Mary carrying in a basket this beloved child of hers to the very place that was supposed to be his death. This is where he was supposed to be died. This is where he's supposed to die. This is where he was supposed to be cast and thrown that he might drown. And she is carrying him there in the hopes that he might live. That's exactly what our baptism symbolizes. That's exactly what happens when we go to the grave. We go to a place that is filled with horror, eternal death, with the hopes that we might live. The interesting thing, that word that is used in the Hebrew language for basket is the same exact words that we read in Genesis, the same exact word that is used for ark. It is the vessel that would carry Moses into life. And can you imagine, there's nothing in Scripture that tells us that Moses' mom knew that the princess was going to be bathing at that time. Who knows why she cast him out in this basket onto the Nile River, but she does it with incredible faith and trust in God. And now we come to Moses' adopted mom. Because as the basket is floating out into the river, one of Pharaoh's daughters, a princess of Egypt, notices it and sends one of her servants out to go get it. And when the servant brings it back, she opens it up and finds the baby. And immediately the scripture tells us she knows it is a Hebrew child. This is not an Egyptian. And so immediately she knows also this is an illegal child. Dad's told me and everyone else that he's supposed to die. And if she was to follow the law and follow Dad's command, and I want to make sure here, kids, we're not talking about not following what Dad tells you to do here. But if she had, what she should have done was tip that basket right over in front of her and allow the child to drown. Instead, she takes him in. And when Moses' sister comes walking up and says, "Hey, I can help," she accepts the offer and allows the child to live. And so we find our third characteristic of an incredible mom, an open heart without prejudice, and a showing of mercy. How many times must we as children be forgiven? But an incredible quality of this mom, who is not Moses' birth mom, is that she doesn't care that she is not her birth mom. There's this incredible open heart, this incredible love that she shows towards Moses, this child that she has no connection to physically, and yet she has one emotionally and spiritually. And so she allows him to live. And I think of how many adopted moms in our community, how many stepmoms in our community do the same thing for children that aren't theirs. That they see a child that desperately needs mercy. They see a child that desperately needs love. They see a child that desperately needs care, that is living possibly without hope, with any means of caring for itself. There is no sense of getting anything out of this, but only pouring into this child. And with an open heart and open arms, they take it in and they show that incredible, courageous love again. Because remember, if Dad finds out what she's done, can you imagine what the consequences would have been? And so Moses goes back with his birth mom. He is nursed until an age we don't know when, that he is able to eat solid food. He is weaned, and he is brought back to Pharaoh's daughter. And she calls him her son. And so we find this fourth incredible quality, that she is recognizing purpose and providing direction. Because in calling her son, she names him Moses. Moses is an Egyptian word. We find it hyphenated and added to other words in the Egyptian language, and it means son. Here is a woman, again, that has no biological, physical connection, and yet she doesn't call him, "This is my adopted son. This is not my stepson. This is not some kid I found in the Nile. This is not my friend's child who I'm raising right now. This is my son." As I look around, I can think of many women I see right before me in our own congregation that have done the same exact thing. That a child that is not their own becomes their own. Not because of some physical, biological connection, but because they are their mom and he or she is their son or daughter. But in so naming, there is more to it than that. You see, Moses is also really close to a Hebrew word. Moses is really close to a Hebrew word that means to draw out. And in the scripture here references it in the passive sense, that Moses has been drawn out of the water, that he's been taken out of the water already, that that's who he is, the one that came out of the water, that was rescued from death. But the word that's used there is actually in the active sense. Moses is the one who is going to draw out. And he does. Decades later, we find him back in Egypt after a moment of exile, drawing the entire Israelite nation out of bondage. We find this throughout Scripture. Eve naming Cain and Abel. We find Elizabeth naming John the Baptist. And in other places where the names of children are incredibly purposeful, because these mothers see in these, even in these infants at such a young age, purpose, God's plan. And at the very beginning, gives them direction by naming them something with incredible meaning. A biological mom, an adopted mom, both showing incredible, courageous love, showing incredible trust and faith in God, having open hearts without prejudice, willing to share mercy with those who shouldn't or don't deserve mercy, recognizing purpose and direction in God's plan at such a very young age. I hope that you see in this scripture, as I do, incredible models of who we can be as moms and even as dads to the kids that we have around us in our community. Amen.
Amen.
If you would, please stand and sing together our last hymn for this morning.